All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the third session of the Spring BITS Open Research Seminar. We're so delighted that you could join us today. My name is Grace Hahn. I'm the program manager for the Berkeley Initiative for Transparency in the Social Sciences. The BITS Open Research Seminar, ORS, has generally been supported by the Templeton World Charity Fund. And it's a continuation of a webinar series that we started in the fall to promote and share knowledge about the use of tools and practices for transparency and reproducibility in social science research. If you're new to BITS, we were established in 2012 to improve the credibility of science by advancing transparency, reproducibility, rigor, and ethics in research. We do this through three primary pillars: generating evidence about problems and solutions in science through meta-research, increasing access to open science education through seminars such as this one, workshops, and our flagship research transparency and reproducibility trainings. And the third pillar is strengthening the scientific ecosystem, which we do through developing open science policies, protocols, and platforms that enable open science at scale. So this spring, we just have 2 remaining online sessions. Today, we have a fascinating session covering building student-led reproducible research, featuring speakers from the AIDE lab at the University of Arizona. And our final session will be on Tuesday, May 2nd, on launching the MCC evidence platform, why usable evidence tools are critical for impact. And that will be led by the Millennium Challenge Corporation. So please see our event website for details, subscribe to our newsletter, and follow us on Twitter to make sure you don't miss out on any updates. So now I'm pleased to just briefly introduce today's speakers from the University of Arizona's Applied International Development Economics Lab, or the AIDE Lab. So first, I'd like to introduce Anna Josephson. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics. Her core research focuses on individuals in and households around the world, working on issues of food security, agriculture, and decision-making. Next, we have Jeffrey Michler, who is also an associate professor in ARE. His core research focuses on the economic and environmental challenges facing individuals and households in developing countries. Next, we have April Athnos, who is an assistant professor of practice in ARE as well. Her research examines how environmental practices affect markets, consumer preferences for environmental goods, and economics pedagogy. And finally, we have Lorin Rudin-Rush, who is a master's student in ARE, and he is interested in how food systems respond to shocks and how climate change will affect decision-making throughout the agricultural supply chain. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to the AIDE Lab.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, perfect. So many thanks to Grace for that introduction. So we will today be talking about our experience building a student-led reproducible research experience, which we did during the fall semester last year. Lauren, would you go to the next slide? Thanks. So I will just talk for 2 slides to give a little bit of background on this. This opportunity grew out of Arizona's emphasis on creating authentic resilience internship student experiences. And so it was a bit funny. Jeff and I ended up in a meeting that I'm not sure we should have been in, but we saw that there was resources on the table to train students with a good amount of financial support for those students in skills that the job world really needs. And so we saw reproducible research as an opportunity therein. We got $44,000 in funding, and we supported student interns with $3,000 and up to 3 credit hours over the course of the fall semester. We expanded an ongoing project that used monthly household data from the World Bank. I think Lauren will talk a little bit more about the specifics of the projects. And we posted this ad for this internship experience on a public job board, and we received more than 100 applications in about 2 weeks. We ultimately hired 8 interns, and 7 of them participated and completed the internship over the fall semester. You go to the next slide, Lauren. Thanks. So our 7 interns, one of the things we were looking for was a broad background of experience. We didn't just want everyone to be from our major. We did have, we have 3 students who were in our major. We had, and then 4 students who were from different majors, which included the real econ department, the business school, ecology and evolutionary biology, environmental science, and computer science. So kind of a broad span of experience, people coming to this with experience in different coding languages, some people had never coded before, but we were looking to create a really cohesive learning experience where students would teach students within the intern set, but also they would literally be taught by a student, which was Lorin, and he'll spend most of today talking. We also had 1 faculty member of record, which was April. And then in the interest of full disclosure, although the AIDE lab is Jeff and mine, we were on leave completely for all of the fall. And so we actually had very little engagement with this experience. So at this point, I will turn it over to April to talk about her experience as the instructor of record.
Thank you, Anna. So my role for this last fall semester was essentially to be the administrator and to serve as the instructor of record for the students who were seeking credit. So not all of the students who were engaged in the internship sought internship credit, but they were all kind of interacting in a workspace that was both academic in terms of core learning, as well as blending together the elements of a job to make it a true internship. And so in order to facilitate a successful experience for everyone, I laid down some ground rules essentially that were co-created with the students, both Lorin and our undergraduate interns, and just made sure that everybody would have clear, open lines of communication. What that looked like was early on sort of coming together, talking about expectations of team members, because these were very small collaborative units. And then trying to identify ways of avoiding conflicts arising, which always happens. They didn't seem to believe that this would occur. But of course, those with a little bit more experience know that indeed conflicts will arise. And so we kind of laid out some protocols for dealing with things like that. Also, we spelled out expectations for attendance in meetings. Lorin will explain this a little bit more, but each week there was a large group meeting. And just given the incredible schedules of undergraduates these days, there were, of course, absences that happened, both excused and unexcused, as it were. And so we did have to come up with a policy to handle people who just, Fridays, they had other commitments. And also, I was there to make sure that there was some monitoring and compliance from a work perspective. So students provided documented reading reflections, they kept track of their hours, and then I was able to use those things to just check in and make sure that the interns were all on track and meeting their end of the bargain as well. In terms of the kind of boring administrative things, I definitely kind of tried to bridge some of the concerns of the students with the administrative side. And of course, poor Jeff and Anna, while they were on leave, dealing with payments through the business office and things like that was, that always seems to come up no matter how well you try to plan. And then understanding enrollment, internship credit, what happens when certain departments have certain requirements, and just navigating that space to essentially make things easier for Lorin, because while he was the instructor who was teaching the content, everyone knows that these kind of administrative details can become big distractions. So we tried to keep that off of Lorin's shoulders as much as possible. Go ahead and next slide, Lorin. And so that is ultimately one of the cool things about this internship experience, was that the instructor that was providing most of the lecturing, most of the coding support, and kind of the practicum sides of things was Lorin. That was not the role that I had. So instead, what I did was meet with Lorin to provide support for him, because ultimately this was to try to get him some experience in a classroom setting, as well as in a more kind of workflow setting as well. And so we would meet weekly, just check in, make sure that his lesson plan was laid out. We would, if needed, split up kind of the delivery of content during those large group weekly meetings. And then I just would kick off and conclude the meetings for those large groups as well. But ultimately, what was I there for? I was there to make sure that Lorin could be successful and that the graduate student who would be interacting with the undergraduates the most didn't have that administrative burden to worry about. So when there were behavioral concerns, because of course this is a job, so I was sort of like HR as well, making sure that people were delivering, holding up their end of the bargain. And then if there were any uncomfortable conversations, trying to remove Lorin from that part so that he could focus on being the best content deliverer and coding practicum support person for those undergraduate interns. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Lorin, who did by far the most of the work on this amazing internship experience.
Oh, thank you, April and Anna, for introducing and setting me up. So I'm going to start off talking about what my introduction to reproducible and transparent research was. I started my master's at the University of Arizona fall, I think it was 2021 at this point. Yeah. And so I think the first thing that I was kind of assigned and or recommended that I would do is attend the BITS RT2 conference in September. And that I was really, really helpful in reshaping how I kind of thought about doing research and what all the processes that you need to set up so that you can actually have like these reproducible workflows, understanding kind of how to use GitHub, what the different licenses that you have available to you in terms of like the MIT or new GNU licenses were. In addition to that, so that was a good introduction where I had a lot of information and I wasn't exactly sure how to apply it. And that's where kind of reviewing the AIDE Lab OSF wiki, where they had very clear style guides, very clear expectations of what it meant to be working in this lab, what they would like to see as their coding style, and essentially kind of going through and making sure that I was doing work that was equal in quality to the work that the students before me had done. And then I think the task that really solidified these ideas and understanding how to do this was actually replicating a study as my RA work. So our lab did produce a paper that looked at food insecurity in 4 African countries. And to do that, my job was to clean baseline data for Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Malawi. And a previous paper had looked at food insecurity in Mali during COVID that was written by Adjanon et al. And I actually went through, I took the code that was on their GitHub and I replicated it in using our own style. And that really helped me understand, like, the number one thing I think I learned was that coding is for humans. When I'm writing all this code, it is not like the computer will understand anything that you give it and if it makes sense, but it's very difficult to kind of parse through what humans want you to get out of it. And so I think that was really helpful in just being like, oh, so this is what this function does. And when I do it with this country, I get out these results, and these are the types of things that I need to change. And then finally, like we had a couple seminars where Jeff and Anna went through, I believe, the Reproducible and Transparent Research book that's put out through Sega and BITS. And I also had the wonderful help of a previous student that was there to basically answer a lot of my questions that I had whenever anything came up, and kind of walk me through what the coding style and I would say like just kind of the general maybe like accent of what we like to do in the AIDE lab. And also I've gotten to help some of my peers around in my cohort like introduce some of these ideas and see what they've come to me for help, and that's also helped me kind of build out these reproducible and transparent research practices. And so for this course, what we did was we took the entire cleaned database of entire clean database of high frequency phone surveys of these countries during COVID. And we gave them, we basically taught them how to use GitHub, how to incorporate file paths and to their statistical software. We then would allow them to kind of decide on a general research topic after getting a better understanding of the data that they would be working with. They would then summarize and create visuals of variables that they were interested in, and finally identify their specific target variables for their analyses, refine their research questions, and using these causal diagrams or directed acyclical graphs, they would infer their appropriate regressions from these DAGs. And then in the final weeks, as they were refining and their questions, they would defend their question and then create a poster that they would present to the lab. And those posters are now hanging out in the department hallway. And so basically what we wanted the students to get out of this was an original research question based on their specific interests. They also got a GitHub repository, which can be included on a resume. And they also, again, got their poster displayed in the department, and this can be included in their senior portfolio. And we hope that they really enjoyed the time that they spent working on the project. And so one of the things that we want to, I guess, like have as a caveat is kind of like scaling this is maybe going to be very difficult, because we, as Anna mentioned before, had over 100 applicants. We selected only 8 of them. And so these students are already very motivated and very interested specifically in doing independent research. I myself had a significant background in statistics and mathematics, which was really helpful, I think, during my lectures, because I could kind of go into the nitty-gritty details of why are we doing it like this? I think we had one question from a student that was asking about, I think it was analysis of covariance using a probit or logit model. And I think one of the questions like, so why are these normally distributed if the outcome is either a 1 or a 0, and how does that relate to, like, how does the left hand of the equation relate to the right hand side of the equation? And and having this background in statistics has really allowed me to answer that question fully and follow up later with a more detailed answer, which we went over in office hours. So with funding, we got to attract a very diverse student population. We attracted very talented students, and those students also have a very high opportunity cost for their time. This is one of the reasons why we ended up having our meeting times from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. on a Friday, because that was the only time that worked for everyone. And so if you are looking to implement this type of experience, as you add more students, there's going to be more variation. So we only had to deal with people using Mac operating systems and Windows. but I'm sure if you get about to like 10 to 15 people, you'll probably end up working with people who use Linux, especially if they are interested in expanding their coding skills. They're also going to have different preferences for statistical software. I am mostly versed in Stata. I have done work in R and other softwares, but I kind of stress to the students that it would be much easier for them if we all worked in the same language, and it would also be much easier on me because trying to come up with multiple different examples in multiple different languages all within a week is a little stretching my capacity for time. And so one thing that I noticed that we went over a lot was trying to like really ingraining the idea of file paths so that you can create these reproducible workflows. I think we probably spent maybe 2 or 3 hour sessions that were each an hour long, kind of like going back over file paths, helping students create file paths, trying to figure out how to implement file paths in Stata using Macintosh operating systems, which have a little bit of a different view, like the file paths just look different. It's a little bit interesting trying to integrate that and help students integrate their own computer so that they can create like a group GitHub and create reproducible file paths in their own ways. I think a lot of our time is also spent kind of explaining why we were doing these specific statistical techniques, going over how to implement them in Stata and what they were like when you're implementing a difference in difference, are you actually getting the results that you think that you are getting, or are you getting some, or like, you know, it takes a little bit to think through and really express what these results are, and not just in what you think they are, but what is the data actually telling us. And then another, I think this was a time where I made a call to above for a little bit of assistance, but as I was pretty new to working with causal diagrams, I did as best as I could, but we had Jeff come in and help out in explaining causal diagrams and helping, and that was really helpful for me because it gave me a better understanding of what we could kind of pare down from the causal diagrams the students came up with and help that to focus on a specific research question. And so in general, here are some lessons learned and strong recommendations that we think will be helpful if you want to implement this type of undergraduate research experience. So number one is back up the data that the students are using, because accidents happen. So we, as talented as these students are, you know, I think I've had my own issues with losing data, and it's very, very helpful to make sure that you have kind of a separated file structure just for these specific projects, because then if anything gets messed up or corrupted, then you can easily go back and fix it. Another thing that we think would be very helpful is make sure you set your meeting time before you select the students. That will create a good screen so that you're only going to get students that are available at those specific times. We selected our students and then thought it would be great to select a meeting time afterwards. Again, that turned into 8 a.m. on Friday mornings. And we basically, our intention was to have an hour of lecture early in the week, an hour of practicum later in the week, and then have our assignments kind of do every week at the end of the day after they had their coding practicum. What ended up happening is that students were not available at 2 different times for an hour every week, and they were all available for 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. And yes, everyone for the most part showed up most of the time, but it's early. I was a little sleepy when I got there. The students were a little sleepy when they got there, and it takes a lot of coffee to want to go through those types of statistical techniques in the morning. And we also, one of the things that we really liked was that there were a lot of participants with experience in multiple operating systems and in just really diverse like majors. I think it really helped the students kind of learn from each other. We had one student who is incredibly gifted at coding, who is just a really like a lifeline for helping us integrate the Mac operating system, because I believe April and I were mostly experienced in using Stata in Windows, and that and we really appreciated the students taking the initiative to help each other, and that was really nice to see. And so another lesson is that you probably want to have a statistical software in mind. And this is with the knowledge that, it's if you are working in R, that's great. It's a free product. Everyone can just download it. If you're working in Stata, that's going to add some costs. Or you can, if you are paying your interns, it could be appropriate to get the interns to buy their own copy. But if you don't want to do that and you want to have everything provided, you probably want to include that in your budget for your grant. And also, I would recommend making sure that that the instructor is well versed in that language, because it will allow them to best help the students that way. Also, setting expectations before your first lecture and meeting day, and definitely holding to them. I think we would have been a little bit better off if we had come up with maybe a micro employee handbook and that set the expectations that people could refer to. One of the challenges at the beginning was people just deciding that oh, well, I signed up for this thing, but I have this other stuff going on in the afternoon, and it's kind of difficult for me to attend this morning. And we realized that we did not necessarily say that these students had to be there, and we had relied on the assumption that they would want to be there every single time. And I don't know if that was necessarily the wrong thing, but it will prevent future issues if you make sure that you have kind of a system set up before with what you expect out of your students, what the attendance policy is, and with understanding that giving them a understanding of if they do certain actions, then that can result in their termination from the product or from the project. And number 6, and I really want to reiterate this, do not let students have access to data you are not prepared to use, because even when systems are set up to be transparent and reproducible, inexplicable events will occur. We had a situation where a student somehow de-indexed our entire World Bank project file drive. And it was the way we had set it up to ensure ease of the program was that there were a lot of our nested files did not have specific names related to that country. So for example, we were cleaning rounds of high frequency phone survey World Bank data on COVID in Ethiopia. Ethiopia had files called rounds R1 through R12. Nigeria in that file also had files named round R1 through R12. When they get spit back out at you, it is almost impossible to figure out where they are from. And we had a bit of a time trying to figure out the best way to put it back together. And that was, I guess, really for our next time going over this, we are going to set up a separate file structure just for the students, so that if anything like this occurs, that it will be easily brought back to life, and we won't be as derailed as we were in this experience. Because what ended up happening was that we took a period, while we were wanting to work on the World Bank data throughout the entire project, we had to defer a lot to some of the available slides that used examples from data that was like within our within stated data. And so I think that's about everything that I have. And I guess we can stop the share and go into some questions.
I see that Abdul Rashid has his hand up. So Abdul Rashid, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
Thank you for the great presentation. I was wondering if do you post your materials online so that other people can use them, like students like me can look at them and learn some coding practices and data, like data packages, things like that.
Yeah, so we have our lab GitHub repository, and we also have our Open Science Foundation webpage wiki, where we go over our style guide and kind of more expectations about roles, what your role is in the lab, and also that's I don't know if we specifically have our code from this past research experience, but I believe we have a lot of code related to that. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, yes, thank you. I will look up the website.
Additionally, we used Nick Huntington Klein's book that is freely available. It's a really incredible resource. And he includes, there's the text of the book itself, and then the latter section of the book has a lot of data and code and examples, and he includes it in Stata, R, and Python. So depending what your preferred software is, he probably already has example code. So that's also been a really good reference for students who are like really wanting to go in deep on one specific method to look at that a few different ways. I also find it really interesting to see the differences in code between the different languages. Easy for
Can you hear me? Oh, sorry. Sorry, Jeff, you were going to say something.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make like a general comment that I don't know if you attended or saw our annual meeting this year, where we had one of our keynote speakers was Guido Imbens, and I was trying to connect basically the work that you're doing here with the work that Guido wished he would have done. Like, and he was talking about how he wished to his undergrads or to his graduate students he would have do more hands-on training on coding practices and reproducibility issues, and it is very impressive to see how basically, in a sense, the work that you are doing at Arizona and other places are leading the way in this domain, and so like realizing the wishes of people who are in the like the frontier or something like that Nobel Prize winners, and you're doing like you're ahead of that. So that's very, very impressive. Wow. And it will be and I just want I think the only comment, the question that I have is that I want to think, and you touch a little bit upon this, Aaron, like how to continue pushing forward and expand it further both to undergraduates, to masters, to graduate schools. Maybe actually the group has a different perspective because Aaron is going into graduate school now, and maybe you can think of how to bring this into your, like, with your student, with your classmates in reading groups or something, and instruct as professors. Anna and Jeff have a different perspective, also April. So I would like to hear what are your thoughts on that space.
Yeah, so one thing that the University of Arizona, the provost and the president have really been pushing to engage undergraduates in more hands-on research. And so in a wet lab setting, that can be, you get students in, put the coats on them, and they can do some basic, benchtop tasks. And so we've been trying to do this in economics, Imbins and others, Ted Miguel is been talking about this for a long time. And I think we all know, at least those of us who work with undergrads and then graduate students, the biggest difference between the two tends to be coding experience, not necessarily econometric knowledge. Everyone goes through and knows how to get your prelims and knows the rule, knows blue and the rules for OLS. But students, especially undergrads, just don't learn a lot of coding, especially at big state universities. I mean, at Berkeley, it's maybe different. And so we found it very challenging. Initially, we were working just one-on-one with a couple students every semester as part of a directed or directed study. And it's just a time sink. You don't really get anything out of them. The students don't seem to be, it's like learning a language. It's hard, really hard early on, and they don't see a lot of light at the end of the tunnel. And so we were able to get this funding from the university to try and scale this up and think, well, maybe there's economies of scale. If we are working with 8 students at a time, then we're not just sitting one-on-one, we're working with 8 of them, and that might be a lot more productive and useful both for the students and for us. It was challenging. It is challenging. There's definitely diminishing returns. Much more than 8 students, I think, would become very difficult outside of a classroom setting that's just focused on coding. But yeah, the students learned a lot. One of them is now going on, and she's going to be our master's student next year. Some of them decided they do not want to be economists and do not want to code ever again. So it has different, the students kind of got a real sense of what it's like to do economic research, which is a lot of time sitting in front of a computer writing code.
And Lorin, do you have any perspectives on, like, thoughts of how to expand this potentially with either reading groups or independent studies in your upcoming graduate courses, or have you thought about that or anything?
Actually, I apologize. I missed a little bit of that. But I think in terms of just, I actually, sorry, could you repeat your question again?
Yeah, no, if you have thought about basically expanding this exercise, but with your now your classmates instead of the undergraduate students, so or suggesting the school to do this type of exercises.
Yeah, I kind of, I'm always kind of 2 minds with teaching programming skills, because on one hand, I think that a lot of it is kind of just building up that practice and going through and using it to actually like apply like kind of the theoretical knowledge that you get. But on the other hand, I think that one thing that I kind of noticed was that I personally, like when I started working more with the other people in my cohort, they had much different coding practices than I did. And that I realized later that it was because I was brought in, I was immediately like, it was drilled into me that this is how you set up your file paths. This is how you set up your this is how your code this is readable code. This is something that you can understand, and so I think it's really important to kind of get a good understanding, not just of like, how do I do these functions that I'm learning in my econometrics class, but like, how do I like load my data in a way that I'm not having to kind of like exit out of Stata and then redo everything if I get to the end of coding in the command lines and I don't like the product that I have. And that's been, I think, the big thing that I've been trying to help. Like whenever anyone asks me for coding help, I as much as I can, I try to be like, oh, well, if you kind of set it up like this, I find that a little bit easier, but I think that's also kind of something that some things you just have to kind of learn through practice and through kind of making mistakes, and that's I think that's kind of the I guess I would say I think it's kind of important to get like these kind of like very base level understanding of like file paths and coding structures and kind of and like do files or script files that you would be running so that you can run the same programs without having to put in the extra work that you need to every single time.
Yeah, and it was a little challenging to communicate. They were having a hard time just learning the coding languages, and so it is from a scalability perspective how to manage watching 8 to more people bang their head against the table for a while, and telling them, yes, that's the point. You're getting paid to bang your head against the table is bizarre to them, right? Because they're accustomed to I am actively doing something that produces an outcome all the time. And it's like, sometimes it takes you hours to figure out what you did wrong. And I think that was a nice thing that they could all be compensated for their time that way, but that also adds an additional layer of scaling. So they were, man, I would have applied for this as an undergraduate too. They were getting paid over $30 an hour if they were only working the amount of time that they were to be working. And just finding the funding for that, right, can be pretty tricky. But at least at this stage, we don't know how low they'd be willing to go in terms of their willingness to accept an hourly rate. And that's another consideration to have too, is like, do you want to do timesheets and hourly pay, or do you want to do lump sum stipend style that's more akin to graduate assistantship style funding? And so depending on the incentives, you might also get different. If you did it hourly, they might be more willing to say, yeah, I banged my head against the table for 2 hours. Like, go ahead and pay me for it.
I just have a question about whether you all have built in any sort of like formal or informal feedback channels with the students. Like, if, when they enter, do they maybe indicate their, level of knowledge on a certain range of topics, and then when they leave, they can sort of say whether they've grown, or I guess I'm thinking of how, as you continue to do this with new cohorts, you sort of get feedback from the students to know what is the most helpful, what they would want to spend more time on, and sort of how you plan on iterating over the years in terms of the materials that you go through with the students.
One thing I'll mention quickly is that sorry, my voice is gone now. The funder of this program that supported us is collecting pre and post data from the students about their sort of experience and what they feel like they've learned. With that said, we haven't received those data. They told me they would send them to us when they'd put them into a report, but we don't have those yet. I think that that'll be really helpful, especially since it's not collected by us, but they can say, I didn't learn a thing, and they're not going to worry about hurting April's feelings or Lauren's feelings because it's to this other third party. So I think that will be really useful. Lorin and April, I don't know if you collected some additional information too.
Yeah, so there was certainly some goal setting that that we did initially, in terms of what types of experiences were they looking for, what skills did they want to get, and then we also had them sort of reflect on other non-research-based experiences that they've had too, in terms of internships. So like, what do you like about a good job? What have you liked about experiences that you've had in the workforce or in internship style experiences before, to try to not only have it be kind of fulfilling from a research perspective, but also from a employment perspective too, with that dual goal of getting them skills and somewhat highly desirable job training too. And then they did provide informal reflections each week about what it was that they had worked on, what had they developed, and that actually wound up being a pretty good tool to evaluate which skills they were spending their time on and which presented difficulty and which they gained facility with.
Thank you.
I might ask the audience, has anyone who's on have experience or other stories to share about trying to teach, coding and working in a way, teach students how to, make their work reproducible?
Hello. So I'm still a student. I'm doing my PhD, but I could definitely relate to what you said, especially in my coding. Sometimes the difficulty is to know when to start making it reproducible, right? Sometimes I would just write the code just to get what I want, and I would say maybe when I have to share the code with someone, then I will make it looks much better. Do you have advice on that? But of course, I'm realizing now that the code is getting longer, and sometimes I even forget, okay, wait, does this happen? I have to go back to, lines up. Yeah, so should it start like from the beginning? And is there a trade-off between the time you take to just do the code to get what you want, or making sure everything is very detailed and meticulous, but then it takes long time to do that?
So we teach our students to start, right away. Many of them come in with no coding experience at all, and so it's very easy to say this is how you do it, right? You don't have to fight against any ingrained bad habits because they have no habits at all. That's not how I learned how to code. I mean, like many of us, no one really taught me. I learned it as I went through the PhD program. And if I tried to, reproduce my code or rerun my results today for my early work, it would be a mess. So I would say, for you as a student, try and teach yourself, try and force yourself to make it reproducible from the very beginning, because it's going to take more time. In the long run, it'll take more time to go back and try and reformat and remember what you were doing, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So we have, if you go to our website, and we can share our OSF link, we have examples of kind of our coding style guide. Some of it's just putting in plenty of documentation so you remember what you're doing. Some of it's putting in lots of white space so it's easy to see. I also plug, Ann and I have a book coming out published by Routledge on ethics, in applied economic research. And one of the things we do, one of the chapters there is about how to make sure your code is reproducible, how to use GitHub, how to basically learn these best practices in writing code from the earliest time that you can, instead of trying to learn them later in life, like Anne and I have had to do.
I also just want to reiterate for anyone doing a graduate program or any kind of research, have multiple backups of your data. Like I really, really cannot stress how I had an experience where I was fortunately unfortunate, where the end of my first semester of my master's program, I accidentally bricked my computer and I lost all of the data from that one semester. And I'm very grateful that that happened very early on in my career, because now I have like tons of physical backups. And that was actually one of another stroke of luck, as I said before, we had a student de-index our entire World Bank folder, and because I had that unfortunate experience my first semester, I had a physical copy of that backup that we were able to for the most part recreate our data set with not too much trouble. So I highly like, there's no investment in backup that isn't worth it. I strongly stand behind that.
It looks like there was a question in the chat, which maybe the asker could rephrase it, but about the challenges common to each country related to socioeconomic, climatic, or cultural factors during the research. Could you just explain what you mean by to each country? So there was a topic that, yeah, this was World Bank data from Africa. So are you talking about the research itself, or are you talking about the experiences of the students? Or maybe could you just explain a little bit more what the question is about?
Maybe the person's not on anymore.
That's fair.
So we have another question. Student-led research should be reproducible, but how is the initiative supporting scholars to keep their data? Do you mean, hosting the data, or can you also explain a little bit more?
Maybe as we wait, I actually just have another question in terms of scaling. It seems like, and maybe correct me if I misunderstood this, but it seems like you spend a lot of time teaching the actual coding, and so that might make it difficult for scalability in the future. I'm curious if there are other maybe organizations at the University of Arizona who, maybe specialize in that. At Berkeley, we have something called D-Lab, and they just specifically do workshops on all the languages. And so just as you think about scaling in the future, I wonder if it would take, to take less of the burden off of you for the actual coding, but then assuming they already have the skills in Stata or R or whichever language, then you can sort of focus more on the practices or, coding with collaborators. And just wondering if you had considered that, or if that's something that might be helpful given your bandwidth.
Yeah. So the university, the libraries have both workshops to kind of introduce you to a variety of languages. And then there are also librarians who run basically weekly, kind of self-help meetings, where if you have a problem, you come in and they can help you debug your R code or debug your Python code. So we send students to that, especially grad students who are not going to take the time to code or to teach them how to code. They're going to have to learn it themselves. we found those are really good to kind of get them started and to debug, but trying to kind of work them through a research project in a timely fashion does require. This time it required us doing a lot more actual teaching coding. Our hope was that if we put them in research groups, that we can kind of teach a little of the basics and then focus on directed acyclic graphs, causal identification, and kind of the practices of making your research reproducible and transparent, and that the students themselves could, as a group, kind of help each other and hold each other's hands as they learn, how to actually work in the language. So as I think we didn't schedule enough time in the internships. They were supposed to work 6 hours a week? And I'm sure, most of them did not do that because they're all high achieving students. They're all taking like 18 credits. Most of them were juniors or seniors. One, it was his last semester before he graduated. And so, they have things, graduation's a higher priority, keeping an A or 4.0 is a higher priority. And so we didn't schedule enough time in their lives or in the internship to really allow them to sit for hours and, work it out themselves. So one thing is trying to figure out what the right time is. I think next time we'll do it again this coming fall. And I think we'd go for a year as opposed to a semester. A semester is just not enough time to really get them, to where we would like them to be at the end, given that we really can't expect much more than 5 or 6 hours a week out of them.
Gotcha, thanks. And unrelated, but you mentioned that they sort of have posters that they work on and are presented. Is that online somewhere? Like, do you all have a blog or anywhere where you can share these so others can sort of see what the students produce at the end of the internship?
That's a good idea. We should put them up on our website. We have a page on our website about the internships. And so we could just put the posters there.
Yeah, sounds good. Could be really interesting, and for other people who are running labs as well. It could be helpful.
And a good way for the students to be able to directly point to this outcome. Students graduating from the University of Arizona have a portfolio of their work on graduation. And so being able to say, it's not just here in my portfolio, it's also up online would be a nice component.
Awesome. Well, I see we're at time, so just thank you so much again for joining. We will be posting the recording and the slides on our website and our YouTube channel. And I'm sure the presenters are open for questions over email if you all should have any after the session. But just a reminder, we have our last session on Tuesday, May 2nd. MCC will be presenting on their evidence platform. And just stay in touch with us through email, Twitter, our newsletter, and just have a great rest of your week, everybody. Thank you.